welcome to the first panel session of the day here on Accelerate Stage. We're going to be talking about in this session making modern public services accessible for all. If you've just come from the main stage, we ended on a note of inclusion and diversity, so this is quite a nice follow-on from that conversation. We've got a fantastic panel with us here today, and if you're the same as the audiences that we've had, I know there's going to be lots of questions, so I'm not going to speak for very long. What I'm going to do is do quick introductions to each of our speakers. Same format then as yesterday. I will invite each of our speakers to give some very short scene-setting opening remarks so you get a sense of where they are coming from, and then it's over to you. We will throw it open to all of you for questions and conversation. So first of all, we will hear from Jonathan Finch, who is the White House's, that's very hard to say. He's come from the White House all the way in Washington, Acting Director for Digital Experience. Then we will hear from Christine Bellamy, who is the Director of Gov.uk in the Government Digital Services here in the UK. Then we have Sandeep Kumar, who is Executive Vice President and CTO and Head of Portfolio of Invent UK's executive team at Capgemini. Then we've got Emma Ochene, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Data Officer for Employment and Social Development Canada, who flew in yesterday. I hope your jet lag is okay. Yesterday, I know you came straight from the airport. And then last but by no means least, we've got Theo Blackwell, who is the Chief Digital Officer for London at the Greater London Authority, United Kingdom. So you haven't had a long way to come then, Theo, just a couple of minutes, if that's right, from where you are based. So I'm sure you agree, we've got a fantastic panel. As I say, I'm going to invite them each to give some opening remarks, and then I will come to you for questions. Jonathan, I'm going to kick off from you to hear what's going on in the White House.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone. It is so great to be here and really, really excited to be talking about this topic. I think when we think about innovation, it's really easy to think about what the next frontier is. What might things look like 10 years from now? But this is a topic where we can make really small and tactical changes today and have a huge, huge impact for the people we serve. And so I think it just makes it that much more exciting. Like so many of the other governments represented on stage here, the US government is an enormous service provider. So this topic is really important to us, and it's actually quite timely for our team. Just last year, we released 2 policies on this, the first on delivering a digital-first public experience, and then a separate policy on strengthening digital accessibility. And so I wanted to just kick off the discussion today by talking a little bit about what making services accessible mean as we've tried to articulate through those policies. So I'll be brief, but I think it really boils down to 3 things. So first, ensuring that services are accessible to all members of the public. That is perhaps accessibility in the truest sense of the word. In the US, over 60 million Americans live with some type of disability and may rely on assistive technologies to navigate online. So we need to ensure that our services are designed to work with those types of technologies. Second, we need to ensure that services are accessible regardless of the choice or preference for technology. We were very deliberate in calling this digital first, not digital only, in recognition that whether it be through choice or whether it be through necessity, some folks might not be able to access digital channels, and we certainly don't want to leave them behind as we push to be a more digital government. And then lastly, making sure that services are accessible regardless of what one knows about the topic. You know, we shouldn't expect the public to know how we as a government are structured or to decipher complicated legalese or acronyms or government jargon. A quote that I quite like is, you shouldn't have to know how to know. And I think that really summarizes part of the problem and the challenge here. So we're pushing on thinking through how do we design content that is easy to find, is easy to navigate, and ultimately is easy to understand. And I'll close just with something that hopefully was evident through those examples, which is that this is not just a technology problem. It's technology, it's content, it's user research, and probably so many others that I don't have time to name right now. But it really is about how do we pull all of those functions together which will enable us to make progress in this space. So looking forward to the discussion and talking a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Jonathan. Really good way to kick off, because I think you've set out some of those really fundamentals that you have to have kind of a range of channels for people to be able to choose from. Definitely not only digital, because I think that issue of are we going to exclude some people as we digitalize all of our services, really important. And then making it easy. I love that. You shouldn't have to know how to know. I think that will resonate with a lot of people in the audience. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Christine, coming over to you.
Hi, I'm Chris Bellamy. I'm the director of gov.uk and work as part of GDS. So I'm going to go a bit half full and then a bit half empty. So GDS and gov.uk is 12 years old, and it's really done some great things. It's made it possible for users in the UK to access services. It's one design system, means it's less complicated and easy to get to things that people need. And the work that's been done on user-centric design has really set out a real way forward of how you can make it easy for users to use digital services. So far, so good. But I think we need to be careful about being complacent. And so our job now at sort of gov.uk and GDS is to sort of take that and say, where next? And there's lots to do. So if we say that for every 1% of users, that's 700,000 people who can't access services, and we're running at about 80%, there's a big case out there for change. If we then, on top of it, think about the 18 to 25-year-old market that's coming through, and the fact that they're no longer using websites, that they'll go anywhere but a website to get information. We've got this real problem that what's coming ahead of us is a sort of tsunami of users that will just not see government services in the same way. It's probably going to get worse, not better. And so the challenge now to make services accessible is to start to think about what we need to do next, because expectations have really changed. Everything we did through COVID showed that we can make it more digital if we try, but we need to it needs to be urgent. And so now it is about, just building on our last speaker, it is about thinking about the channels that we reach our users on. What's our channel strategy? How do we make it easy for people to access services from government? It's also about thinking the content and the formats that they want to see it in. That's changed so much in the last 10 years, and our expectations should change with it. And then finally, there's this key word that we've talked about, probably many of you in this room, for 6 or 7 years, that word of personalisation. But what does it really mean? You know, it isn't a word that should be sort of difficult. It's about utility. It's about ease of access. It's about making it possible to access services. If I'm a night worker and I get home at 11 o'clock at night, government should always be on for them. So our challenge now is to sort of be there where the user is at the time of need, potentially even before the need arises, and start to think about where we want to take that. And we can learn from industry. We can make this work with partners. But we do need to act now, because if anything, we're starting to go a little bit backwards, and our users, the expectation is that the services are going to get better.
Great, thanks, Christine. So a really balanced picture there in terms of we've made good progress in the UK, lots of thinking on user-centred design, but there's so much more that we can do. Can't be complacent. Very kind of a big challenge ahead, as you said. The users are moving faster than we are in terms of providing those services and thinking about different channels that they're going to be using, the format that they want to have their information in and their services delivered to them in. And then what does personalization really mean? I like the way you put it. We need to be there where the user is. So I think lots of challenges ahead for us. Thanks, Christine. Sandeep, to you.
Very interesting topic. I'm Sandeep Kumar. I'm part of Capgemini Invents. I lead our global citizen digital services offering. The idea to globalize came to me about 4 years ago when I realized that we work with all of the governments across the world, but we are mirroring the governments in our ability to share knowledge between the governments in the different countries on the innovations that each government is achieving. So we started to say, okay, as a supplier, can we connect the dots? So I think my main theme around innovation is, let's not reinvent the wheel globally. There are numerous instances where we can share best practice between the countries and we can learn from each other's successes. And I'll pick 4 areas to just sort of talk through that. I think the first one being open data, and open data systems is really one that will really drive our ability to engage citizens, not just through the government front door, but through other bodies and industries that can access that. So, for example, the utilities can use look at citizen vulnerability and then decide how they treat them when they have continuity of electricity services, for example. Or in the financial services industry, using government data to look at vulnerable customers and banking access could be an example. And the US government has exposed 250,000 data sets. The UK government has exposed 45,000 data sets. There's a lot more that can happen there. The second one, which is a big theme, is mobile first. I think a lot of governments in the developing countries have learned that mobile is the one that every citizen has. For example, if you take India as an emerging nation, has got 760 million mobile users, far greater than what you would have with computers. And when they launched the mygov.India app, they have 40 million users on that system in 2 years. So mobile first also allows you to shape experiences differently for citizens and provide an always-on government where you can personalize the experience as Christine says. And my final point, and I have to use the word generative AI because it is so current, but on that, it is a technology that is offering possibilities. It is not perfect, but it is offering vast possibilities around some of the things that Jonathan was mentioning around how can we automate the simplification of language. How can we build intelligent data conversations with the citizens in their context? So those would be the key areas to get us going.
Sandeep, thank you so much. I love what you said, because this theme of we need to be sharing good practice better than we are at the moment. So I love the way you started off there. Let's share across countries what's working in terms of improving accessibility to services. And then your key points there in terms of things that might help. So open data systems and working across sectors on that as well, really important. Mobile first, which echoed, I think, what we've heard already, moving away from websites as well. And then has to come up, generative AI and the possibilities that opens for improving services to the public. Thank you so much, Sandeep. Emma, coming to you.
No, thank you. I'm Emma Okuni, Chief Data Officer of Employment and Social Development Canada, an organization in Canada that really serves all Canadians. And one of our concepts is we do not leave anybody out. So we need to make sure that we're reaching everybody. So I'm a chief data officer, so I'm going to start with data. So for us to understand the clients we serve today, tomorrow, and in the future, data is essential to everything we do. And when I say that, what do I mean? So we need to understand the dynamics in our population. So in my job, we work very closely with our statistical agency in terms of understanding the current population and also the projections into the future, and also the intersectionality of that population. Because if you look at how this population has shifted in the last 20 years, it's imperative for us to understand that shift in order to design client-centric and client-focused services. The other key point is we need to measure. So we need to measure in terms of who we're leaving out. Jonathan, you said it. From a lot of the work we've done on just seeing who we're leaving out a lot of the core vulnerable population. So even if it's 2%, to Chris, your point, when you start looking at the volumes in numbers of those people, it's extremely important for us to dig in and say, why are we leaving people out? What are those barriers to delivery of services? And the other point we wanted to make sure is, how do we put that data into insights? Jonathan, you spoke a lot about the acts. You know, we have a lot of acts, we have a lot of frameworks, we have a lot of legislation. The challenge for us is, how do we take all that, and take the research, the data, and then shift it and say, how do we make sure we're putting the right policy and operational interventions in the right places, so that we're reaching the most vulnerable in our society and we're not leaving anybody out. In order to do this, we cannot create products or services without the user in mind. And when I say this, I'm not talking about consultation for the sake of consultation. I'm talking about really bringing the user into co-creation and co-development and co-conceptualization. Many people saw my LinkedIn picture yesterday. Somebody posted my picture on LinkedIn from the panel I was on. And one of the top questions I got asked was, why are you holding a mic and everybody is having headsets? Like, it was consistent. And I told them to guess why, and they couldn't really guess why. Some people would say, maybe you were late, because you came in yesterday. I said, no, that was not why. So I'll leave all of you guessing why. But again, it speaks to the need to really understand the people you serve, the compositions of who you're serving, and making sure that you don't get stuck in your echo chamber of assumptions. So I will stop here and I'll pass it over to the next speaker.
Emma, thank you so much. I'm really stressing a key issue that's come up in lots of our sessions, the importance of data. All of these things we want to do, we can't do unless we really understand the data. And here you're saying essential to have that, to understand our users, understand the differences and the nuances in our populations, and to measure who we're leaving out. Really the most vulnerable, are we actually creating channels that they can interact with? And then that real plea at the end, we have to co-create with our users to really understand what works for them. Thank you so much, Emma. And then Theo, we are coming to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the interventions before. I am in much agreement with all of our experiences here. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for London. My job is to advise the Mayor and the Greater London Authority on how we join up data, how we design better services across London and its 32 boroughs, how we engage with the smart city questions, and how we tackle digital inclusion. And there are three aspects that I'll introduce now. Firstly is that digital inclusion question. We've seen many iterations of how we engage with citizens online, from government-funded schemes to hand out laptops in schools about 15 years ago, to a really big push on service design by Government Digital Service, making things mobile-friendly as well. And that was a tremendous achievement. And I thought UK local government, UK government as a whole was pretty well set. And then the pandemic happened, and we realized that actually the depths of digital exclusion were far, far deeper than we had assumed. And so the approach that I see adopted by cities is now taking those learnings from service design and applying them to the problem. So now we're seeing things like digital inclusion services that focus on the needs of the user, that give them a much more rounded offer of basic digital skills, a refurbished laptop, like we're doing in London with Good Things Foundation, or access to a data bank or cheap connectivity, looking at the whole problem, not just aspects of it. And that is fundamental. Our elected politicians demand it. And it's also important for the innovation agenda. Our elected politicians demand it because it is morally the right thing to do. But also from the innovation side, we will not progress in innovating public services if people are seen as being left behind. So it is important for all innovators to have a digital inclusion play, because you'll be asked about it and you need a really strong offer on that front. Second point, data, fundamentally important. Not so government can get more data and manage the problem harder, but because data can help you build better services. And I think there's a fundamental challenge facing government as a whole, and by that I don't mean central government and town halls alone. It's government together. We do not connect the data between town halls and Whitehall or central government in this country as well as we should do. Most people get most services more often locally, and yet this data is trapped in silos, legacy IT, and it needs to be freed up so we can develop exciting new products and services for people. If we want to deal with vulnerable communities and we're just looking at a borough or a city of 250,000 people, your vulnerability groups will probably be about 6,000 to 8,000 people. That is not enough data to create things. But if you're connecting other local authorities together, you're spotting things, you're being able to develop a common offer across the board. So fundamentally important how we unlock that. And finally, emerging technology. Of course, data can drive new business models, new ways of working, tackle old processes that we've set in stone with the IT that we've bought. But when we look at the changes that generative AI can bring about, and it is totally developmental at the moment, you'll see how not just data points are important, but websites become data in a generative AI world. And that will change our relationship from the citizen potentially from find out how you can do something to how do I? And we need to be prepared for that change because that hands quite a lot of control back to the individual, but also challenge to the organization developing that generative AI. So exciting times on that front too.
Fantastic, thank you, Leo. Theo, I really like the way you put out there that shift to a more holistic approach in terms of helping people. So not just giving a laptop, for example, but doing the skills if people need the kind of basic skills and they don't have the connectivity, for example. So looking at the whole kind of wraparound care that a user might need, making sure that nobody is left behind, really stressing not just the quality of data, but how much better it could be if we connect data between central and local governments, across different local authorities, for example. And then again, echoing what Sandeep said about how generative AI is going to fundamentally change the landscape. And as you put it, maybe giving more power back to individuals and what a challenge that will be for organizations. Loads and loads of food for thought there. I'm sure there are lots of questions in the audience. I've got one. I don't do this often, but I'm going to do something quite personal as the chair. I know it's probably not good practice, but I'm just going to throw a challenge a bit to our panel here, and then I will come to the audience. But I'm currently kind of navigating lots of public sector bureaucracy on behalf of my parents. And my father has dementia and is having to access public services in a way they've never had to do before. They're in their 70s. If they didn't have somebody like me helping them, it would be impossible for them to get the information that they need. And even me helping them, I'm finding it difficult, and I'm finding services aren't connected and it's really hard to know where it is. So my question is, have we already left a generation behind? And are we kind of just ignoring the elderly and moving on? So are they kind of digitally excluded already? I am going to do this because we haven't heard from you for a while, and then I will shake up the order after this. But Jonathan, coming to you first.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the risk here, right? As we push to be more digital, are we leaving out the folks who don't want to be or maybe can't be digital? But I don't think it's game over. You know, I think as we think about folks who are maybe less used to navigating online or using their mobile phone, it places that much more importance on how do we design and structure the content in as simple a way as possible. So rather than sending you to a page and saying, good luck, I hope you can decipher it, really structuring it so it's question, okay, I can answer that question about myself. Next question about what I need to do next. So I think as we strive to make sure we are including those people, I think it really just does come down to being really thoughtful about how we structure content, how we structure services, and guide folks through processes that are really complicated, even for folks who work in them day in and day out.
Thanks. Christine.
Yeah, I think potentially, but I think there's some good hope on the horizon. So here in the UK, the work we're doing on the One Login programme and the rollout of that makes it possible in the near future to be able to think about, in your case, your parents, and you to be in a situation where you could take ownership of their account, you know, with sign off and everything done correctly. And if you think about that world, it leads you to the potential of starting to think about that really being user first. You're joining up services that have no connection to navigating the government complexity. You're actually starting fundamentally with your parents and you're acting on behalf of them. And that is a real different, that's like the best banking app. That's making it possible to access services in an all different level. So I think it's very doable. It's just about making it important. So I think that can do it. I think it's a really interesting stat is that the biggest user case of the NHS app is people in their 70s who are getting repeat prescriptions. So it's not really about the technology, it's about the ease of access, and we need to go harder on making it possible for people to access services in the environment they're in. So I think game's not over. I think there's more we can do, and we can do it quickly.
Thanks. Sandy.
Very, very important question. And I agree with both Jonathan and Christine that actually we can see a better future in this space in two fronts. I think first, a lot of governments are thinking about using life events around which you design services rather than designing for agencies of the government. So, for example, at birth, loss of job, death, a health event, how can we make the services center around the citizens' need? It will take a lot of effort, but in some governments have made good progress. For example, the Finnish government has starting to design 35 key life events of citizens and build services around that. It's a great example that we can all draw from. The second one is the mobile first piece, because I think it is one of the technologies that every age group can absorb a bit more easily. And if you have a very simple super app of government in the mobile, which also is simple, to Jonathan's point, in terms of navigation, then we can actually make it easier for the elderly to access services at home rather than go somewhere to get it. So we could actually use it to make things better.
You haven't met my mum with a mobile phone. Emma.
No, thank you for the question. When I think about digital, I don't go tech first. My head doesn't go to tech. It goes more to the mindset of horizontality and leaving nobody behind. So from that concept, one of the things we've really done in Canada is to work with community groups. So we make sure that we bring the services to the different communities, and I think that makes a significant difference. And we have a multi-channel approach, so not just one door. There are many, many doors you can go through. But I agree with you in terms of, some of the language, and I think somebody said, I think it was you that said it, in terms of the language is very difficult and bureaucratic. So I think there still needs to be work done on that in terms of simplifying the language. The other piece that I wanted to bring in, after the pandemic, one of the things I noticed, this is just watching things around me, there was a big move to automate parking lots. So parking lots before had attendants in there. So one day, cold winter morning in Canada, I go to the parking lot, and I saw a senior citizen. He was circling around, and I was wondering what was happening. He had an older phone, and he couldn't use the app in the parking lot, and he didn't have anybody to ask. So I went to him to see how I could help him, pay for parking. But, things like that, which is why we really need to understand the population we serve.
Yeah.
Our populations are aging, and as we design new tools and tech, we need to have that mindset of, how do we make sure we're not leaving people behind? So great question.
We have that same issue with parking here in the UK as well. We've automated a lot of it. Theo, your eyebrow, the parking issue here.
Yeah, I mean, that's more of a borough issue, but it's a really, really good example. I'll finish with that. Fundamentally, service design and how it was articulated here in the UK by the Government Digital Service back in 2012-13, I think has been transformational. And I don't... initially started off as something that was totally in the digital sphere, but when I'm talking to policy teams in the Greater London Authority, we were just discussing the issue of online harms the other day and violence against women, and using a service design approach that allows you to see the journey of someone, a particular user, a persona that you've made after talking to people and just said, okay, this is a particular person who has experienced this, and what's their pathway and what are the points of failure with the council or the police or other authorities that could take an action, it's not a new way of looking at things, but it is in some policy areas, a bit of a revelation when you look at it from that angle. And so I would say that, in relation to the case that you made about your parents, the idea that if you're encountering a blockage, it's probably because there's been a process in place for a very, very long time that we've built some IT or bought some IT around, rather than thinking about that user journey. So I see the service design ethos as fundamentally transformative to public services, even if you don't use digital in the process. Language is really important. One of the things that Government Digital Service brought to the fore was this real emphasis on explaining things in plain English to people, which should be total common sense, but is again quite alien to a large part of government service delivery, because it just sort of snaps back into that language that we're comfortable with in local government. So the challenge over plain English is fundamentally important. But where do we want to get to? We want to get to services that are built around the needs of people. It means we need to really think about what our public services are built on, how to make them more composable, how to build them around the needs of our populations or the groups of people. At the moment, if you want to apply for something, you would probably encounter about 8 different ways of applying for something. Some social care needs, a recycling bin, a grant, and so on. We have a very kind of odd way of doing that because everything's just been built around service verticals from the 1970s and 80s. I find it really interesting during the pandemic that actually, and I think one of the great achievements that was made was the NHS app. And it doesn't surprise me that it's used most often for prescription charges, because that's just a cheap, a good, hassle-free way of getting what you want. But embedded in the NHS app, of course, was also the kind of retro popularization of the QR code, which seems to have just now become completely dominant way of communicating with people, an easy, simple way for people to get information to their fingertips. So I think there's hope here, but we need to think about when something new comes along, do we want to build it in the way that we did before, or do we want to do it in a new way?
Fundamentally new way.
Parking, I said I'd end up with this. If you go to the National Parking Service, I think it is, there's a website there which explains how they're trying to build a unified way of joining up parking data in England, and it's insane. It's been going on for 5 years, and it literally involves going to all of these private operators and saying, "Can you build a way to share data with us easily so we can do all of these things?" And it is a kind of example of the challenge that's facing us if we want to retrofit all of these old systems. It's fiendishly complex. It involves dealing with loads and loads of sometimes quite small private sector organizations that only are there for one purpose and don't really have the capacity to change, plus lots and lots of local authorities. But the advantage of getting hold of that data and changing it could be totally transformative.
Thanks, Theo. Thanks so much. We could have a whole conference on parking
I'm
and
not going to
potholes.
mention parking again, I think.
Parking and potholes will be the next conference.
I'm not coming.
I do potholes.
Okay, over to you now, the audience. Who has the first question for our panel? I mean, we've only touched on tiny bits of accessibility. Yes, can we get a microphone there? And then the second question will be the lady with the hand at the back. Thank you. And then I'll come to you as well. So we've got 2 here and then a third. I'll take 2 questions first. Thanks.
Hi, Joe from Cabinet Office. I've got a question probably for Christine and Theo. Around the last decade, there's been great progress from a central government perspective in terms of capabilities, sharing. But do you think we've focused enough on local government?
Great. So if Christine and Theo, if you want to answer that quickly first, and then I'll get the mic to the second person. If you could put your hand back up, we'll get the mic to you. I think, that one, and then I'll come to you. Okay. So,
Do you want me to go
Christine,
first?
then Theo.
I'll go first. I think the short answer is no. I think it's important to have a sort of relationship between the two. People's lives are local, absolutely. And the sweet spot is developing services where you consider what's local and what's done from the centre. I think in this next period of time, we need to tighten up. We need to come together. I think our job at the centre is to make sure we can build the framework that makes it possible to join everything together, to do one service and do it for all. So our mission this year is all around making it possible that the centre does more, so it's easier for local to adopt services at a sort of national scale. So more to do.
Thanks. Theo, I'm going to fall off my chair if you answer yes. We've gone and asked.
No, it doesn't. Look, often I'll see a government announcement and it'll go, new government digital strategy for X. And I'll open it up and it only applies to Whitehall. Yeah. Whitehall has an amazing tendency to think of government only in its terms and not think about it in the eyes of the citizen, who doesn't necessarily distinguish between the grand departments of state and what they see on the ground and the services they receive. So we need to end all of that. There are initiatives, quite good initiatives, that are around, but they're not joined up. There's stuff that's reforming the planning system, which is really good. I said I wouldn't mention parking again, but our friend in the Department of Transport doing parking. There's some work around smart data. There are Connected Places Catapult does smart city things, but it's just like very different, sort of just a sort of scattergun approach to local government. So fundamentally, we need to move from looking at government as Whitehall and look at it in the round.
Thanks, Theo. So we've got a question. Oh, okay, we'll come to you and then I'll come to the other lady. So we'll take these two together. Yep.
Hi, Yvonne, Cabinet Office. With the news yesterday, the tax office is shutting their call centre for 6 months. Are we in danger of being too digitalised and using chatbots? In TfL, I got charged £20 coming from Woodford to Excel yesterday, and trying to get a human to talk to is ridiculous.
So I love this question. Are we moving too much away from human interaction to chatbots? And I'm going to take two and you can answer one or both. Yep.
Hello, Lauren Wielden from the UK Health Security Agency. So I'm neurodiverse, I need accessibility, but I find the services don't meet my needs as they are now, and we're trying to always retrospectively fit that. What stops us pausing where we are and looking to the future and making services better in that way?
Can I just ask a clarification? Is that because you think, in terms of the definition of accessibility, it's not broad enough? So neurodiversity doesn't get considered enough?
I think it's something that's upcoming. Yes, I guess so.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, so answer either of those questions on do we need more human interaction, and also the neurodiversity point is that how can we be more inclusive in that respect?
I'll briefly answer the first question on the risk of too digital. I spoke about it a little bit, but look, there's been countless sessions at this conference that have been talking about AI and the benefits that it can bring and the opportunities that it can deliver. And when we see these new exciting technologies, there is certainly a tendency to try to grab hold and deploy them as much as possible. But it's a great point, right? We should not be deploying chatbots and other uses of AI for the sake of doing so. We should really be pressure testing. Does it actually make it easier? Does it get the person from question to answer in a less amount of time or in fewer clicks? If the answer is no, we're going to frustrate them more than if we allowed them to speak to somebody on the phone and get an answer. So I think we should be aggressive in trying to deploy that technology and equally aggressive in pressure testing it to make sure that it is in fact improving the experience, not complicating it more.
Do you think the pressure to do it, though, the cost saving of doing it, kind of overrides the customer experience sometimes?
Sometimes, sure, but I think you also need to think about the bigger picture. So if a chatbot is confusing folks more, that's then leading to more calls down the road. So I think it is about cost savings broadly, is the right frame to think about it, not just in terms of the kind of
Immediate.
one-time shift from analog to digital.
It could be a false economy. I'm going to come to Emma and then on this one. So Emma first, and then Sandeep, I'll come to you on these.
I mean, for this one, it goes back to the same thing. When we're designing services, we have to look around the table and say whose voices are not being heard, because that's part of the challenge. And then the other piece is we always need humans in the loop. Like this whole assumption that you can automate crappy processes and it'll be good is a false assumption, and that is what is leading to a lot of the issues we're seeing. I've seen people say, we need to automate this. What exactly are you automating? And what outcomes are you trying to get to? So I think if we started at identifying those outcomes, better outcomes for citizenry, then we would design better processes because it will logically come to that. And then what are we rewarding? What are we incentivizing in the systems? Are we incentivizing these good practices? Or are we just incentivizing cost and efficiency? So I think we need to take a more balanced approach, and then remember that as public servants, our raison d'etre, I will say that in French, but basically our reason for being is to really serve citizens. So if we go back to that, we will not leave anybody out, because that will be our premise, and that will be why we're doing what we're doing, regardless of if we're using AI or some new tool. It will be quantum next, we'll be talking about, but we will center it around people and the people that we need to serve.
I really like what you said, don't automate a crappy process. I think that's a great strapline for this session, actually. Sandeep.
Yeah, I think having been at the sort of the coal face, building these services throughout my career, I'm gray slightly because of that, I think we have to reflect on the method by which these projects get delivered. Every project has a business case, and it has to show the benefits in terms of cost, benefit, etc. So what inevitably happens is technology is just a tool, and then the project is getting financed in some sort of way, and at the end of the day, there's a pressure to deliver, which often might lead to suboptimal situations. I think here's where I think regulation and standards play a very important role. So for example, if we want to deliver inclusivity and accessibility, the GDS standards will be the one that should be the litmus test of whether the service that was delivered to the minimum common standard that is accessible to all parties, and is it inclusive of all the citizens? Is it diminishing the quality of experience from where they are when we deliver the digital system? So my main point here is technology is just a tool. How much money was spent on it and how we implemented it and what operating model we put around it is where the service design point that Theo made elegantly earlier comes into play. It's the holistic view, and often that gets cut corners because of various practical reasons in delivery of services.
Thanks. Christine, Theo, did you want to answer? We've got 5 minutes left. I've just been told we have to finish at 11, so we've got 5 minutes left. Did you want to pick up at all on the accessibility and neurodiversity point? Because I think this is still a relatively kind of new area, I think, and maybe we haven't taken into account neurodiversity enough in this context. Christine, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, just to touch, it'd be wonderful if we could reach out after the session today. It's in our current workings in GDS, but we know that this is just not fixed. So it's almost like going again and making this a real priority going forward. So if you wouldn't mind, whoever asked the question, it'd be wonderful if we could touch base, because talking to our users is the best thing we can do. Thank you.
Thanks. So we've got 4 minutes. Okay, last question at the back there, and I'm going to have to ask everyone to be really brief in there.
Hi, I'm Tom from DSC. I'll try and be quick with my question as well then. As we transition to a cashless society, how do we avoid alienating a fairly big chunk of the population for whom that is the only comfortable way with which they pay for their goods and services?
Really interesting. So cashless, is that going to exclude, again, another group of people? I'm going to ask all of you if you've got any thoughts on this, but you've got about 20 seconds each. So Sandeep, you're nodding along to this. Is this an issue?
Yes. I think whenever we bring a new innovation in, it's about thinking of the transition. Right? So cashless has got numerous benefits in the sense that it can make the cost of transaction immensely low. It reduces the risk. So for example, the cashless society transition in South Africa has made security so much better because transporting cash was massively difficult in that country because of the risks of that. So there are benefits, but you're exactly right. The question is the pace of transition and making sure that the alternative, which is probably mobile-based payments, etc., is actually available to everybody before you turn the other one off. And that's the key point there.
Thanks, Sandeep. Theo?
Yeah, I think cashless, also working from home, and the fundamental impacts and changes that that's brought about, those are speedy changes that have happened over the last, 5 years, really. And I don't think we've really fundamentally worked through the consequences of that. Working from home, it doesn't tend to get discussed because newspaper editors don't like it being discussed in any depth. And I think that's had quite a fundamental shift in our economy. And on cashless, I think that we have the benefit here of open banking, which has been a tremendous innovation, allowing people to switch bank accounts and do things via their phone. I think just as people were used to the check, and then the check, certainly in the UK, not in the United States, where it's still quite commonplace, where the check has virtually disappeared. We are moving in the direction of a cashless society, but the difference is the speed at which we're doing it is the different factor. So I just don't see that being kind of factored into broader discussions about resilience in society and things like we tend to focus on other things rather than those two things that are really working their way through our economy.
Thanks, Theo. I'm afraid we are out of time. But if you did want to catch any of our speakers on the cashless issue before you all leave the room, then please feel free to grab them. But I'm sure you will join me. I mean, so many issues there. And I think, Theo, that is a really good point to end on. The speed of change, I think there's a risk is leaving people behind. Not just what we develop coming forward, but already the speed in which it's changing.